Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. My name is Faren. I'm going to be your fashion guru today. This is Judy, my assistant. She's a little drunk. We are going to be talking about 6 simple special seams. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe because we got a lot of great content coming up and you should hit that bell. Let's get started. So this is my fashion studio. My name is Faren. Can you see any of this junk over here? You can. What junk? Shall we get started with some equipment? Maybe these big scissors to cut your fabric. Your fabric, perhaps. The clippers, thread, and get ready. Ow! Glasses to protect you from any broken needles that could happen while you're sewing. All right, so let's get started with my good friend Judy over here. I'm gonna be telling you the direction you should be sewing. It's very important because all seams should be following the grain line. You should be sewing down the body. Check this out. Judy. This is our little bodice. So you start all your seams from the shoulder point here. This is the highest shoulder point towards the center front. Highest shoulder point, outward. The shoulder point here around the armhole towards the side seam. Side seam towards the waist or hem. All right, now that we have got that down and you understand, I hope, we're gonna put that away. Standard seam allowance for industry sewing is a 1/2 inch around the body. All seam allowance for commercial patterns are 5/8 of an inch. So don't get that mixed up. 1/2 inch industry, 5/8 domestic sewing. A 1/4 inch seam allowance is used for any seams that are on the inside. So facings, collars and cuffs, anything like that is a 1/4 of an inch. Okay? That is industry standards. All right. Now we're gonna get to, let's move Judy because I feel like she's creeping on me. And let's get this stuff out of the way. All right, so we're gonna be sewing with the sewing machine today, as you can see. If you need help threading this thing, go to the second video and I will tell you everything you need to know to get intimate with your machine. Now that you have your threads ready, decide if your seam allowance is a 1/4 or 1/2. Start by placing your fabric underneath your presser foot. We got this going on here. Okay, now that your needle is in your fabric, do 2 stitches. Then from there, you back tack. Back stitching is a method to secure your seams. I only suggest like 2 to 3 stitches front and 2 to 3 stitches back. So just move your threads out of the way. Align your fabric with the guide on the throat plate and just start stitching. Keep sewing until the end. And then once you get to the end, you back tack. Give your hand roller a little roll, lifting up your presser foot. So once that's out, just give it a little clip and your other ends, and there you go. You have your straight stitch. I purposefully made the bobbin thread another color so you can see it later. Now we are going to be doing the top stitch The top stitch is just any decoration on top. I said that, on top of your fabric. Okay, on the right side of your fabric. You open the seam. I like my seam allowance pressed towards the left because then it gives me a good guide for the 1/4 inch. My presser foot is approximately 1/4 inch. So I line up the edge of my presser foot with the edge of the seam. So my top stitching is going to be 1/4 inch from the seam. Another thing that you could do is change your stitch length, which I like to do for a top stitch because it's a little more decorative. Place your fabric underneath the presser foot and put your needle through the fabric. Stitch a few stitches and then back stitch. Do that until you get to the end. And when you get to the end, back tack. There you go. Was that easy? That is a top stitch seam. Edge stitch. Edge stitching is used for collars and any sort of facings that are inside. Okay, so your seam allowance is usually 1/4 inch. The edge stitch helps with the fabric rolling towards the body. All right, let's get started with our edge stitch here, lining up the inside edge of your presser foot with the seam, because an edge stitch is usually stitched about 1/16 of an inch from the edge of your seam on the top side of your pieces. Okay, so the right side of your fabric. Put your needle in, do a few stitches, and you know the drill. Back stitch. Okay, all right. French seam. Okay, throw all of those seam allowance rules out the window because the French seam breaks all of those rules. This seam is sewn at 1/4 inch with the wrong sides together. We're good to go. 1/4 inch all the way down until you meet the end. Lift that out and cut. What helps your French seam not become so fat, you have to trim your seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch. Okay, just take that down to 1/8. And then from there, I really like to press my seam open. So making sure that your fabric is pressed open and turn it onto the right sides together. The seam allowance is going inside. It's kind of sandwiched into these pieces here. And you stick this piece, which has a seam here, lining that up again, 1/4 inch, putting your needle through and back stitching, and then you give it a go all the way to the end. All right, there you go. We got our French seam. Look at that. It is the cleanest seam ever. You don't have to serge, you don't have to zigzag, you don't have to do anything. All of your seam allowance is sandwiched on the inside of this freshly new stitch seam. What's next? What's next? We got the mock French seam, which is supposed to be easy, but it's really not that easy. This one is right sides together, and you're sewing at a scant of 1/2 inch. Back tack, and go for it. Woohoo! Done. So we're on the back side, okay, right now. We are on the wrong sides of the fabric. This is your seam allowance. and you fold your seam allowance towards the seam. Both, looks like a little butterfly, okay? So folding that towards the seam. This is what your seam allowance is supposed to look like on the inside after you iron. And then you fold those together, and then from there you top stitch on top of those pieces, lining your presser foot edge on the inside of your presser foot to the edge of your fabric, okay? Just give that a go. Ooh, that looks pretty. Very sturdy seam. No! Last but not least, we are going to be doing the flat fell seam. The flat fell seam is a seam with 2 stitches that's on the top side of your fabric. So what you have to do is, get this, listen. You stitch with the wrong sides together, not the right sides, okay? Wrong side of your fabric together. And stitch at a scant of a 1/2 inch. So just a bit past your 1/2 inch mark. Just a straight stitch all the way down to the end. Clip that. And here's what you do. You take one of the seam allowance and you clip it, you trim it at 1/8 of an inch. So be careful. 1/8 of an inch. Get that away. And then from here, you press your seam allowance open. Now that it's trimmed and pressed, your seam allowance from the big side, so like the 1/2 inch seam allowance, you take that and you roll it on top of your 1/8 that you just trimmed, sandwiching the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on the inside. All right, so you get that going on. It might help to press this. And then from there, you just edge stitch that seam allowance down to the top side of your fabric. Make sure that you're rolling your seam allowance underneath and it is catching, because if it doesn't catch, then you really don't have a seam now, do you? But that's it. Beauty. That's it for me today. Thank you for watching. If you like this content, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, not a problem. Give it a thumbs down. Or if you'd like to see any other tutorials, let me know in the comments below. This is your fashion guru signing off. Oxford cloth. Peau de soie. I'm going nowhere.